Hi guys, it's Catherine here. So I think today's video is going to be a little bit longer than usual because I've got quite a lot to talk about. So I've got my cup of tea at the ready and let's just begin. So I want to talk today about Kazuo Ishiguro, who's an author that I've heard about for quite a long time, but I only honestly started reading his books about a year ago. But I've been so impressed, and I think his literary contributions are so great that it's really worth dedicating an entire video just to him and giving some recommendations on books that I think are really great. So I want to just give my own thoughts and recommendations surrounding his books. Hopefully that'll be interesting to you if you've not read any of them before, but equally if you have and you enjoyed them as much as me, hopefully you'll take something from it as well. So Kazuo Ishiguro is a British author of Japanese heritage, and he moved to the UK from Japan at a very young age. He's an internationally renowned author, and one of his books won the Man Booker Prize in 1989. Although I'd say it's perhaps the dystopian Never Let Me Go that is his most popular and successful works. Despite the litany of literary prizes that he's won, I think his books are very accessible and highly readable, and they discuss themes that do really impact all of us. I would categorise his books largely as historical fiction because they are often set in the past, whether a historically accurate one or one in which he's taken quite a lot of creative licence. And he seems to particularly like writing about the period surrounding World War II, and I've read that it's because he likes exploring how people's ideals have been challenged by the upheaval of that period. A couple of them do also deal with Japanese identity, but it's worth saying that he is a British author, and he indeed didn't even go to Japan for 30 years after he left, and so his writing does not really resemble Japanese literature, and he does write in English rather than Japanese. I think that's worth mentioning because it was a misconception that I had. I gravitated towards him because I really love the writing of Haruki Murakami, and I sort of mistakenly thought that they would have a lot of similarities, but it's really not the case, and they're very different authors. He's called himself an international writer, and I think this is an interesting concept, and it's certainly one that infiltrates his books, because although his characters are of varying nationalities and it takes place in a variety of countries, the ideas and themes in the books relate more to personal identity rather than national identity, and has a lot more universal themes that I think makes them really accessible for almost any reader. His novels deal largely with memory and nostalgia, and they usually have a first-person narrator who muses upon the decisions that they made or failed to make in the past. His protagonists are always openly flawed, and I find them likeable and human because of that, and they don't always make the right decisions in the course of the novel, as is human nature, and in some way they often fail to resolve the crisis that's at the heart of the novels. I think some people might find Ishiguro's novels frustrating because the endings are often quite unsatisfying and they don't tie up neatly like you might expect at the end of a novel, but I think this lack of resolution often reflects real life, where there isn't a moment where everything comes together perfectly, and one form of resolution often brings other uncertainties. I've not quite read all his books yet, but I've read 6 of them, so I thought it'd be worth going through each of them briefly and giving my recommendations. I've not actually yet read his first novel, which is A Pale View of Hills, published in 1982, but the most recent one I did read was his second novel, An Artist of the Floating World. These 2 are his only novels to be set in Japan, and although I did enjoy reading An Artist of the Floating World, I think it's clear that his writing style has developed a lot since then, and I wouldn't necessarily recommend that as a place to start with his writing. This book follows an ageing artist in the years after World War II, and he reflects a lot on his regrets about the purpose of his artwork, especially in light of Japan's failure during the war. He was once highly respected as a painter, but he's finding himself being shunned by his peers as a result of the rapidly changing ideals in Japan. As with many of Ishiguro's novels, they're written in the first person, but the protagonist is, especially in this case, less than likeable. I would say Ono is quite arrogant. He's definitely sexist, although this isn't necessarily that surprising considering the time period in which it's set. He's also an unreliable narrator, as the reader starts to question the veracity of his memories, and he himself questions the extent to which he can accurately remember the past. This is definitely the most subtle and meandering of Ishiguro novels I've read, and it definitely aims to explore more of a psychology than be a progression of any real plot. It was nominated for the Man Booker Prize that year, so it's definitely an intelligent novel, but I would recommend it more if you are already familiar with Ishiguro's work and you enjoy this slow and subtle pace. His next novel is The Remains of the Day, which won the Man Booker Prize actually, and I'm not that surprised that it did because it reflects a lot of the same themes as An Artist of the Floating World, but it does expand on them and it does allow for a lot more story progression. It follows the diary entries of an English butler called Stevens, who decides to take a break from his job and go and visit an old colleague in hopes of rekindling their friendship and perhaps encouraging her to come back and work with him. Again, this novel reflects on the period surrounding World War II and the questionable political ties of Stevens' former employer, which Stevens wrestles with throughout the novel because he has a great deal of respect for his former employer and doesn't want to view him as anything less than a great man. I found Stevens to be a really sympathetic character, and the novel follows his attempts to banter with his new American employer, and it really goes against his instincts to always act with subservience, and the issue of dignity is something that comes across a lot in the novel as well, because he feels like it is really his function is to always have dignity. Again, this is mostly a psychological novel, and although it does include a physical journey to go visit his old colleague, it is mostly structured around his sentimentality and his nostalgia for the past. I found this a really fulfilling novel to read, and I really liked how it dealt with a lot of the issues faced by Britain in the post-war period, particularly the changing social hierarchies where someone like a butler is having to face up to these new expectations of him, and then also regrets about the past decisions made both on a political and a personal level. It was genuinely a pleasure to read this novel, and I really like that its perspective was from a butler who's the kind of character whose voice you don't often hear because really their job is to be invisible and not voice an opinion. I've not yet read his next novel, The Unconsoled, mostly because it's a lot longer than the others and I've just not really found the time yet, but if you have read that one, please let me know what you think because it is coming up soon on my list. Then he published When We Were Orphans, which follows an English detective, Christopher Banks, whose parents went missing in China when he was a child. This novel follows the quest for him to find his parents again, and it is a more ambitious plot than some of the previous ones, but I did actually find that it was to the detriment of the book as a whole, and I felt that it lacked a bit of the heart that the other ones did. As with the others, it does deal with profound themes of love and loss, but I just felt like it wasn't quite as nuanced as the others. And as a standalone book it's good, but just in comparison to the other ones I've read, it was maybe a little bit disappointing. So I would still recommend it, but it wouldn't be top of my list. The first Ishiguro book I read was Never Let Me Go, which I think is his most ambitious and maybe most accomplished work so far. And it departs a lot from his previous work in its science fiction qualities, and really it's a dystopian novel following a carer called Kathy who's reminiscing about her time at a boarding school. It's unclear exactly the circumstances surrounding Kathy's work for a large part of the novel, so I don't really want to say any more about the plot because it's really best just to discover it as you read it. I will say though that it's expertly done and it contains the recognisable themes from Ishiguro's work like memory and identity, love and death, but it deals with them on a much larger scale because it's discussing really an entire alternate future, and it's quite upsetting to read about actually. It impressively describes the experiences of childhood and adolescence, but it transposes this onto a dystopian setting, and it is deliberately obscure in parts about exactly what's going on, but really because of this I found it a really impressive novel. I think this would be a really great place to start if you've not read Ishiguro before, because it has a really good blend of a genuinely compelling plot and also the signature psychological musings that you come to recognise in Ishiguro's work. In 2009, Ishiguro also released a book of short stories called Nocturnes, 5 Stories of Music and Nightfall. They all involve the struggles faced by musicians, whether directly through their work or otherwise, and as with all Ishiguro's work, there's a strong tinge of nostalgia and regret in them. I found it a really charming collection and I would definitely recommend it. Ishiguro's most recent novel is his 2015 The Buried Giant, which I think in some ways totally defies his established style, while in other ways entirely reinforcing it. It's really a fantasy novel set just after Arthurian Britain, involving the relationships between Britons and Saxons. In particular, it follows the story of Axel and Beatrice, who are searching for their son in a neighbouring village, and their quest brings them into contact with ogres, dragons, and relatives of King Arthur. It is fantastical, but yet, like other Ishiguro work, it has at its heart issues of memory and guilt. This book got quite mixed reviews, and it is certainly experimental and far from perfect, but I really appreciated his attempt at trying something new, and I thought the end result was a success. As with Never Let Me Go, I don't want to say too much about the plot because I think that would detract a lot from the reading experience, but I would say I would recommend this one, I think, more than a lot of the other ones because it is more fast-paced and I think would appeal to a wider group of readers. This book in particular makes me excited to see what he's going to write next, because I think over the last 10 or so years he's really proven that he's not a one-trick pony and that he does have the potential to write across genres. I definitely wouldn't recommend Ishiguro to everyone because his books are generally quite slow, they're very cerebral and they often lack resolution, so they're definitely not everyone's cup of tea, but they are really up my street and I think a lot of people would really enjoy him. He does ponder a lot of the same issues across his work, but never in a way that feels repetitive because he's following different characters in totally different settings, and I think it actually helps you as a reader gain more insight into, for example, the theme of memory by reading about it in so many different contexts. I'd be really interested to hear if you've read any of his books because although he is a really successful and well-known author, I don't know that many people who are too familiar with his work, so it would be really great to hear what you thought. And equally, if you've not read his books before, hopefully I've shown you that he's a really great author, and I'd love to hear if there are any that you're particularly interested in reading in the future. I'll leave links in the description to all the books I've talked about and the other ones that I've not got around to reading yet, so you can check them out a little bit more. But anyway, thank you for watching this video and I hope you enjoyed it. Feel free to subscribe to my channel because I'll be posting again later in the week, and I'll see you next time. Bye!